Lieutenant Edward Lipton, somewhere in the South China Sea, October 3rd, now. Lieutenant Edward Lipton, U.S. Navy, moved swiftly through the nuclear submarine's narrow corridors. His destination was further stern in the operations room, where 3 Navy SEALs under his command had gathered for their briefing. Tripping over one of the lower bulkheads, Lipton cursed under his breath. Even with 9 years in the Navy, he still hated submarines. The notion of being inside a metal tube 2,000 feet underwater was unsettling, as even the slightest pinprick to the hull could be disastrous. The thought of freezing waters rushing into a fissure, filling the interior of the boat with little to no chance of escape, terrified him to no end. Nevertheless, submarines and SEALs went hand in hand. Reaching the operations room, his team squeezed into the small space, accompanied by one of Utah's officers. Everyone stood around a digital display that sat in the center of the room. The screen was currently settled on a small island in the South China Sea, about 150 miles northeast of the Philippines. China had long waited to control these waters. First, they spent billions of dollars building artificial islands, Chinese land in the middle of a free sail zone. Then, ignoring international maritime law, they set their boundaries for what was claimed as Chinese waters. Finally, any foreign ship entering the territory violated their sovereignty, leaving the 2 great military powers on a razor's edge in this region. "I just got off the box with Washington. The mission is a go," Lipton said. A naval officer removed a key that hung around his neck. Once Lipton confirmed the go-ahead, stepping over to a locked box, he inserted the key and unlocked the safe. Inside was an envelope that was sealed. Taking it out, the officer stepped over to Lipton and handed it over. "Confirm the transfer of sealed orders at 1808 Zulu time," the officer said. "Confirmed," Lipton replied. Lipton opened the envelope. A small disc was inside, which he slid into the console. A moment later, an image of their target was displayed. Lipton had already been briefed before his team rendezvoused with Utah, but that only covered the operation's essential aspects. Finite details would be planned and sent ahead to the USS Utah before being uploaded onto a disk and sealed away until this moment. The digital map automatically shifted before settling on a small island just over 80 nautical miles from the submarine's current position. Then, it zoomed in closer before centering on a small landmass, only about a mile in length and a few hundred yards across. A single dock was built to the island's west, large enough to receive a Chinese-type 052D destroyer on a supply run. A series of 2 small buildings were situated in the island's center with connecting roads to the dock, joined by a barracks that housed 300 Chinese Marines. More than a few weapon placements were seen, HQ-9 surface-to-air missile, and a few anti-ship weapon systems. The last structure was a radar building, standing on the far north of the island. While well hidden, there were indications the buildings had other purposes, as a massive power grid and external refrigeration units could be seen, which would not serve any of the soldiers' immediate needs. Indeed, much larger and more critical islands in the area would have easily overlooked this installation. Intelligence has confirmed that this island, codenamed Manta, is a secret Chinese viral weapon research facility. It houses some of the worst stuff imaginable, all of which can easily be put on any number of warheads and fired at targets upward of 500 miles. A particular bad germ, known as the Pangu Virus, has our boys back in Washington worried, Lipton said. Lipton began cycling through the files, each revealing high-resolution images of Manta. He focused on the main facility where they believed the virus was being kept. The most significant pictures were a series of blueprints that had somehow been hacked from a Chinese server or smuggled out from a record room in some highly secure government building back on the mainland. The facility seemed simple enough, with various corridors and officers surrounding a central chamber, serving as the research floor. "We know that 6 years ago, the Chinese military used an earlier version of the virus on their people when a small village in the Kaizen district was exposed by a weaponized version of the Pangu virus. The death toll was 100%, with some 1,500 people dead in as little as a week. If this weapon were ever to be used against a civilian population, such as Manila, the closest high-value target in the range of Manta, it would make the Liberty Island attack seem like a chickenpox outbreak." "We're destroying it then?" asked Chief Lewis. "As much as I would like to say yes to that question, We've been instructed to capture several samples of the virus and bring it back home. The rest is to be destroyed using thermite charges, Lipton replied. This should be interesting, Lewis added. Thankfully, we won't be doing all the legwork ourselves, Lipton stated. The map shifted to the north of the island as a new set of images were shown, detailing a raiding party of 6 vessels to head for the island and strike various points along the northern coast. A group of Vietnamese pirates has been commissioned and kindly asked to provoke the Marines stationed in Manta, so we can enter, get our sample, and extract swiftly. Hopefully without too much of a headache, Lipton said. Those poor bastards won't last long against the Marines, Petty Officer Carmen said. I doubt they'll last 10 minutes. Thankfully, that's all we need. Once the virus has been grabbed and data destroyed, we extract back to the water. We will meet with a disguised cargo ship, the Voyager Dawn, where the sample can safely be stored, Lipton said. With the world's most dangerous viral weapon? Man, I miss the old days when all we were worried about was nuclear annihilation, Lewis added. Everyone chuckled, but the unease in their voices was evident. Each man knew the rules of war had changed since the fall of the Soviet Union. Viral and chemical agents had become the new weapons of mass destruction. Over the past 30 years, dozens of cities worldwide were test beds for terrorists who managed to get their hands on whatever could be dug out of the old Soviet stockpiles. However, Liberty Island had been the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. Since the attack, the U.S. has been on edge, seeking out any potential threat at home and abroad and neutralizing it. More important was the desire to regain the lead in this war by making or stealing whatever horrible and unthinkable viral weapons other countries might have discovered. Question, sir, Carmen spoke. Why not just head back to Utah? Good point. There's fear that the Utah might be tracked and tied the good old USA to the raid. So, it'll drop us off well outside the range of the island and continue its merry way. The Voyager Dawn will be passing in the opposite direction, and should go unnoticed as the ship makes routine trips in this neck of the woods. Understood, sir. Can't say I like it, Carmen said. Well, once this is done, we can rest assured this nightmare will never get out and take more lives. Once Uncle Sam has it locked away, never to see the light of day again, Lipton said. He doubted his own words. He tried to hide his mistrust as well as he could. As the old saying went, it was not for him to ask why, but to do and die. Still, he wished, looking into the faces of his team, he could ease their fears. There were too many variables to consider, as handing a weaponized virus was well outside his comfort zone. Rules of engagement, sir, Chief Saw said. I was just about to get to that. We are expected to reach the island at 0300, so the lab should be minimally staffed. Nevertheless, we can't afford witnesses. So, if it moves, you drop them. Hopefully, once the island goes on lockdown, most non-combatants will be secured elsewhere and out of our way, Lipton answered. Non-combatants? Lewis chuckled. These bastards deserve to die for what they've made. It isn't like we're saintly, Shaw said. Nevertheless, we want to avoid engaging the enemy at all cost. We can't afford to be caught with our pants down on this one, or none of us go home. Lipton quickly shot back. Everyone studied the images, playing in their mind how everything was expected to go, but knowing all too well that anything was possible. Every SEAL worried about the unknown, and how quickly a mission could go south. Make sure everyone goes over the mission packet. Memorize every detail before you get some rest. Let's make sure we pull this one off without a hitch and get home to our families in one piece, Lipton said. Each man nodded their agreement. Copies of the report were handed to each team member as they broke off to catch some shut-eye. Alarms wailed continuously as Lipton and his team ducked behind an outcrop of concrete wave breakers, watching tracer rounds and rocket-propelled grenades streak through the sky. As Lipton had hoped, the pirates had come through, hitting the island with everything their tiny but agile boats had on board. The Marines guarding the installation acted quickly, rushing from their barracks and crewed their stations. Come on! We don't have much time before those fuckers bug out, Lipton said. The SEALs quickly moved out from their cover. Lipton didn't waste any time once he reached the rear entrance. Taking up a defensive position, he waited as Chief Lewis placed a C4 charge on the door, blowing it off its hinges. Swiftly, Lipton led his people through the building as they headed down a long hallway. The team reached the central lab a short time later, the door automatically sliding open, allowing Lipton and his team to enter without the need to force the door. I kind of expected things to be a little more, well, impressive, Chief Shaw said. I hate to agree with you, but me too, Lipton said. The truth was, the lab didn't seem all that important. Everything was decades old, and would have felt at home in an average high school science lab back home. Lewis, begin setting charges. The rest of you, with me, Lipton ordered. He moved carefully to another adjacent wing of the lab, this time coming to a series of locked doors, which he blew open with ease. Pay dirt, he said. A cold storage locker could be seen to the east of the lab, which Lipton indicated for Shaw to head to, while he and Carmen set C4 charges around the area while breaking the caps of several tanks of oxygen, propane, and anything else that was flammable. Lewis? Lipton asked. I found it, sir, Lewis called back. Lipton joined his man in the cold storage, where thousands of vials were kept refrigerated. Each one was written in Chinese, as to be expected. Thanks to a handy scanner that Lewis held, a digital readout translated what he saw in English. Box it and blow the rest, Lipton said. You know, we would be doing the world a favor if we just set everything on fire. I'm inclined to agree, but orders are orders, Lipton said. Lewis grabbed a handful of capsules and dropped them into a specially made container that would keep them cold and safe until the team reached the Voyager Dawn. Once he was done, he and Lipton set double the amount of thermite charges in the storage room to ensure that everything was destroyed in the blast. The last thing they wanted was for the soldiers on the base to be contaminated. Are we set? Lipton called out. Charges are set, Carmen replied. Loading a bug onto their servers now, Shaw replied. And the package is secure, Lewis answered. Then, let's get the hell out of... Just then, a technician walked into the room despite that the alarm had not ended. He froze in place, only his eyes seen as he wore a lab coat and surgical mask and cap. The man froze like a rabbit under the butcher's knife when he saw the black-clad, armed men standing before him. Lipton fired a quick burst, putting 3 bullets in his chest. The man fell face first, landing against a workbench, knocking all the contents to the floor. When some chemicals mixed, a fire suddenly sparked to life, consuming the dead man. Let's move, people, Lipton said. As the fire alarm sounded in the lab, a few soldiers appeared down the hall, coming out from one of the doors leading to the lower levels where most scientists were kept. The SEALs dropped the soldiers quickly, running past their bodies as they bolted back the way they'd come. Once outside, they could hear screaming from inside the building as more soldiers arrived, finding the dead. Lipton and his people never broke stride as they ran as quickly as possible, reaching where they left their Zodiac. Inside! Let's cast off! Lipton said. Chinese soldiers were outside now, rushing to gather more men, but were unaware of where Lipton and his team had disappeared. By the time anyone would get to their position, they were gone, speeding off over the horizon just seconds before the lab and everything inside it blew. The sky flashed bright white, with the sound of the explosion reaching Lipton a mile out to sea. Smiles were on everyone's faces as they began to laugh, as the thrill of what they'd just done sunk in. They remained on course for the next 2 hours, adrift out in the middle of nowhere before the 50-year-old freighter, the Voyager Dawn, appeared over the horizon. Lipton could see through his night vision. The ship made a slight course correction before heading straight for them. Once the Voyager Dawn came alongside their small craft, a ladder was dropped for the SEALs. Lewis went up first, holding tightly onto the case that had the Pangu samples inside, and was soon followed by the rest of the team. Lipton was last as he set a small demo charge on his boat, which would destroy it, removing any evidence they'd ever been out there in the first place. Once on board, the team went below deck to the cargo bay, where a cold storage chamber was stored. Hard to imagine that such a small thing could cause so much harm, Lewis said as he took out the samples, 8 vials total, and placed them carefully into their new containers. Hardly seems worth it if you ask me, he added. Where's the honor in defeating an enemy with something no one can hope to fight against? I don't know, Chief. I don't even know why God would allow such a horrible thing to exist in the first place, Lipton said. Well, I, for one, want to forget this day ever happened, Lewis said. Same here. 2 days later, Lipton felt sick to his stomach. He had already thrown up twice in the past hour as the Voyager Dawn rocked violently in rough seas. He was told 2 hours ago that a massive storm had surged right across the path of the ship, And while the captain had requested to change course, it had been rejected. Washington wanted the Voyager Dawn back in American waters as soon as possible, as the fallout from the Chinese base attack had made international news. China claimed the West attacked its sovereign territory. Typically, such actions would have been swept under the rug as an embarrassment that either China or the United States wouldn't allow such an incident to go noticed by the world at large. But something was different this time. It was as if Beijing wanted the world to know something terrible had happened, almost as if they were trying to deflect blame for something that had not happened yet. Suddenly, an alarm sounded right before the ship captain screamed over the loudspeaker. "Brace for impact!" Lipton hadn't time to heed the warning as the ship was struck. He fell against the bulkhead, slamming hard against his left shoulder, feeling it pop. He forced himself back to his feet as the Voyager Dawn continued to rock severely, so much so that for a second he thought he was standing on the walls. Racing upstairs, his hand holding his shoulder, Lipton reached the bridge. 2 windows had been blown out, allowing a wash of freezing water to flood the compartment. "Christ's sake!" Lipton said, his eyes budging as he witnessed the fury of the storm outside. "How far are we from the mainland?" he asked. "Hours? At least 11. To be honest, I don't think this bucket is going to make it. I haven't seen seas like this in ages," the captain said. "It is like Poseidon has a personal grudge against you boys," he added. "Radio the Coast Guard," Lipton said. He had to raise his voice. Barely a word could be heard as the storm overpowered everything. "I can't! The radio is gone!" the captain said. "What? Are you serious?" "I'm not a man that lies, Lieutenant! Captain, look!" One of the bridge crew screamed as he pointed, indicating to a massive wave bearing down on them. "Hard to port!" The crew heeded the command as the helmsman pulled the wheel as far to port as it would allow. The Voyager Dawn had to come head-on with the rogue wave and try to power through it. The wave was coming quickly, striking the bow at a slight angle. Everyone on the ship's bridge was thrown from their feet and crashed hard against the back wall. A gulf of water flooded onto the bridge, shattering every window as it rolled over the crew, carrying 2 men outside where they disappeared into the darkness. Lipton felt like he was drowning as he swallowed a mouthful of seawater. "Lieutenant, are you all right, boy?" the captain asked as he lifted Lipton back to his feet. "Get this boat back to dry land ASAP! I need to check on the cargo!" Lipton shouted. 2 of his men were already down there, Lewis and Shaw. He ordered them to stay with the sample before the storm hit. Right now, they were struggling to move some debris that had crashed down on someone, pinning them to the floor. "Who is it?" Lipton asked, joining his men. "Carmen!" Shaw yelled. "We need some equipment to get him out," Lewis said. Lipton could see it was pointless. While he couldn't see his man, save for a single leg, he knew Carmen was more than likely crushed and died instantly under so much weight. "The virus. We need to make sure it is secure," Lipton ordered. "But Carmen," Shaw said. "He's gone. We'll come back for him when we can. But right now, we have to secure our mission." Lipton's words sounded harsh, he knew, but they needed to be told to snap his people back. The remaining 3 SEALs rushed over to the container that housed the samples, finding that it was at risk of being broken from its secure place within the cargo hold, despite being bolted to the floor. Lipton stumbled forward as the ship rocked violently. His vision was starting to blur as the pain in his shoulder was becoming more than he could bear. Snapping himself back, he quickly inputted the code into the locking mechanism, opening the swinging doors. "Pull it open! Quickly!" he demanded. Lewis and Shaw did as they were ordered. Lipton rushed inside and stopped just before the sealed containment device the samples had been stored in. It lay on the ground and was pretty bashed up, with a part of the case ajar. Lipton puts in the next series of codes as he steadied himself, forcing the case open as he saw each of the vials were safely inside their cold storage. "I need the backup case quickly!" "This one has been compromised," Lipton said. Shaw ran forward and grabbed it. "I got it!" he said, turning to hand it to Lipton. Right then, the collision alarm sounded once more, followed shortly by the boat captain yelling, "Rogue wave!" Lipton tried to steady himself, wanting to slam shut the case he still held in his hands before the wave could hit the Voyager Dawn. It was too late. The ship was slammed harder than it had been before as the 3 SEALs were thrown about the cargo bay like toys. At that moment, Lipton could have sworn that time suddenly slowed to a crawl as he watched the vials fly free from his grasp. Each one soared through the air before crashing on the hard steel floor of the cargo bay, shattering into a spray of glass shards. He knew the virus was invisible to the eye, with only the liquid splashing onto the ground. Yet, he swore at that moment he could see the face of death wash over him. If there is a God, please let us sink to the bottom of the ocean.